the way, good catch, Kim. If you understand the way things work, it's so much easier to remember. And so what we're going to talk about, or at least start talking about, is we're going to talk about a bear's seasonal cycle. And like I said, this particular talk is about both black bears and brown bears. They do a lot of things very similar, even though they have some pretty stark differences. They're bears. And so they have very similar seasonal cycles. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through all 4 seasons. We're going to start with spring, go through summer, then to fall, and we're going to end in winter, because obviously everyone knows hibernation takes place in winter. But the things that happen in those other 3 seasons kind of have an impact about why a bear spends its winter doing what it does. And so very basic information I'm going to give you here. So let's look at a bear's life and what they are doing during the springtime. Now, everyone knows, we talked about it, or I mentioned it already, that bears hibernate. So the first thing that happens in the springtime, when green up occurs, the snows melt, the weather warms, what you're going to have is this, what we call den emergence. This is when the black bears and the brown bears all start waking up and start coming out of their den. Now they're greeted with some issues going on, because having slept for so long, they're really, really hungry. They lost a lot of weight, and I'll talk more about that later on. But they lost a lot of weight, and they're going to have to start taking care of themselves, but not just themselves. The female bears are going to emerge from that den with cubs, and so they're going to have to start taking care of themselves or their family unit if it's an adult male that has offspring. And so there's pretty high stakes out there once they emerge from the den. And like I said, they lost a lot of weight, and so they're famished. They're looking for food. Now, what can you imagine is out there for bears to eat in early spring? Believe it or not, well, you probably will know this, there's not much out there. When spring green up occurs, there's new growth happening, but it's all pretty much green plants. You don't have berries, you don't have nuts. Other animals, bears are what we call omnivores, so they will eat both vegetable material as well as meat. But bears are not active hunters. They don't wake up saying, "Ooh, I'm in the mood to eat an elk. I'm going to go hunting for elk." They more or less eat meat when the opportunity is available. And so if they stumble upon a newborn deer or newborn elk, yes, they will go for it. But for the most part, with them being opportunistic feeders, the opportunity to eat is usually that vegetation. And in early spring, there's not a lot of really nutritious vegetation. And so, like I said, there's no berries, there's no nut crop. And so they're eating a lot of salad, so to speak. As you can imagine, that this will sustain the bear that has lost a lot of weight, but it really doesn't satisfy them. Imagine being super hungry and all you get to eat is iceberg lettuce. Yes, you'll survive, but you're really not happy. And this is one of the main reasons why in the springtime, you will see a lot of what we call, I hate the term nuisance, but you'll see a lot of activity, bear activity into these human-dominated areas, because the bears smell some really good, tasty, healthy food, but it's usually human-provided foods, and that's bad. And so bears tend to get in trouble in the early spring because they're hungry and there's not a lot of good natural foods available for them just yet. But if they make it, they find enough food to carry them through the spring, that takes them into the summertime. And this is where bears kind of get a little bit of respite, because the good thing is in the summertime, you start getting some of the more nutritious foods, especially the vegetable portion of things, because late spring, early summer, you're even going to have some of the berry crops coming in. So bears will eat a lot of berries. Now, if you ever talk to a wildlife biologist or some sciencey person, they're going to throw a fancy term, and they'll talk about the soft mast crop. If you ever hear someone say, oh, the soft mast is doing good or doing bad, all they're really referring to is the berry crop. So it doesn't matter what kind of berry, blackberry, raspberry, service berries, any kind of berries, this is what really begins to become the main food source for many of the bears all over North America. And so finally, they're having something more nutritious. Obviously, being opportunistic, they're still going to eat that carcass they stumble upon, or a newborn fawn, or they'll get into a beehive. But for the most part, the vegetation is sustaining them. Now, one of the things that happens in the summertime is the bears begin hearing a little berry white playing in the background, and it's that time for mating season. And it doesn't matter if it's brown bear or black bear. Usually that early summertime, mid-summertime is the mating season for bears. And so obviously the male and female are going to get together, and they're going to court each other, and the female is going to get bred. And what happens is really interesting. If you've never heard about it, when a bear mates, the male and female get together, the egg or the eggs within the female will become fertilized, which means the female becomes pregnant, but that egg kind of goes into what we call, it's kind of like a suspended animation. And what it means is that egg stops growing. In order for that egg to grow, it needs to implant in the uterus of that female bear. And that's where it'll get the nutrients it needs in order to grow into a fetus, into a young baby bear. But that does not happen in the summertime. Those fertilized eggs more or less stay hovering in suspended animation within a bear's body. And so that's a really important factor, and I'm going to bring it back up, because what happens is summer goes by, bears finally have some good food sources, the bears go through the mating season, everything's going good, they're putting on the weight that they lost, and then rolls in, and we roll into the fall. And so what happens in the fall? You're going to hear another nerdy term that some biologists use, and they'll mention the bears enter a phase called hyperphagia, which is it's translated from the Greek meaning feeding frenzy. And the bears will begin eating nonstop, sometimes up to 20, 22 hours per day throughout the fall. And at that time, their diet switches quite a bit. And what it switches to, and I'll go back to that nerd term, it switches from soft mast, which is the berry crop, to hard mast, which is the acorn or the nut crop. Again, these acorns and these nuts that our beautiful trees in North America produce are loaded with nutrients, loaded with carbohydrates for the bears to begin packing on weight. Because that hyperphagia, that feeding frenzy, the bear is doing everything it can to put on layers of fat. Now, most of you, a lot of you, especially joining in from Canada, you do have a lot of brown bears. Those coastal brown bears, those are often afforded some amazing food resources with the salmon runs or those fish runs that come in. And usually most people, it doesn't matter where you are in North America, whenever they picture the brown bears and the grizzlies, they always picture this bear sitting in a stream eating fish. And that's literally what they're doing. They're gorging themselves on fish, trying to pack on weight for what's about to happen to them. So it doesn't matter if it's a black bear or a brown bear, they're going to find the most nutritious new food sources that they could find in order to add these layers of fat. Now, I said springtime is a sketchy time where bears get into trouble getting into human foods. Fall is the same way, because their body kind of kicks into overdrive for them to feed excessively. Again, you're liable to have bears get into bad situations where they smell something really good, a human derived food source, and they're drawn to it. And so spring and fall are usually times where bears can find themselves getting into trouble. But as long as we're bear smart and we do everything we're supposed to, the bear won't get access to those foods and hopefully move along. Now, I mentioned that they're in this hyperphagia. They're trying to get fat. Why is that? Well, remember I mentioned the mating thing that takes place in the summertime? What is happening within a bear's body is it's checking to see, in a female bear's body, it's checking to see how much fat she has. Because remember, those eggs, when she mated, they're fertilized, they're ready to grow, but they're not growing because they haven't been implanted in the uterus. And so the bear's body waits for this hyperphagia to pass, this feeding frenzy to happen. And if the bear is extremely healthy, meaning it has a number of layers of fat, the eggs are going to implant in the uterus. And that's when those little baby bear cubs begin to grow inside that mother's womb. Now, understand, if the bear is underweight, say it had a really hard summer, a really hard fall, could not find a lot of food, and so it does not have a very good layer of fat, you have to understand when a bear hibernates, it's going to be a really hard, it's going to take a toll on a bear's body. And if a female bear is underweight and pregnant and she goes into hibernation, there's a really good chance she wouldn't survive. Her cubs wouldn't survive, and the mom may not even survive. And so this is one of those evolutionary adaptations that is just brilliant, because if that female bear is underweight, what would happen is those eggs will be reabsorbed. They won't implant in the uterus. They'll be reabsorbed. And so the mom could just focus on surviving the hibernation and she won't give birth. But if things go right and she's healthy, has a nice layer of fat, those eggs implant and they begin growing in that late fall period. And so that takes us into winter. And as everyone knows, during the wintertime, most bears will hibernate. And I'm going to spend just a minute talking about hibernation because I get in arguments all the time. Kim, I'm going to put you on the spot, so you might want to unmute your microphone. If you were either a young child or you go up to a young child and you ask them, what does it mean when an animal hibernates? What do you think they would say?
To a young child, it would mean they sleep all winter long and they don't get
it. That is what everybody knows of hibernation. Hibernating animals sleep through the winter, and that's what bears do. Now, if you open up a dictionary, Merriam-Webster, whatever dictionary you use, you'll see different forms of it. But for the most part, it's about a period of sleeping or dormancy during the wintertime. And there's even a few definitions that will say hibernation is when the body goes into a torpid state, T-O-R-P-I-D. There's a root word in there because you have no idea how many times, especially down south in the States, where people will argue with me that bears don't hibernate. They go into torpor, which is, it's a biological term. What is going on is people really don't understand what's going on. Torpor is kind of the way a bear hibernates. So to say that a bear does not hibernate is not correct. A bear hibernates by utilizing this process called torpor. And so, like I said, you wouldn't believe all the arguments where people will say, oh, bears in the South don't hibernate, and that's completely untrue. So anyway, what I want to do now, we're going to focus on hibernation. Understanding that whole process of a bear's seasonal cycle is kind of gearing up towards hibernation. So let's talk about that, because that's the gist of this presentation. So why do you think bears will sleep through the winter? And if I go out there and I ask a question of folks, especially when I'm face to face, for the most part, you're going to have a lot of people say, oh, it's to survive the winter, it's to survive the cold and the snow. And that is not really the case. Even though winter time often results in a lot of snow on the ground, The reason bears hibernate is not to survive the cold, because they got an amazing fur on them that's luxurious and it'll keep them warm. But hibernation is this evolutionary adaptation for them to survive periods when there's not much food available to them. And so a scene like this, you're like, yeah, there's not, especially if they're eating mostly vegetable matter, there's no berries, they can't find it underneath all that snow. But it's not because of the snow, it's because there's not much food out there for them to eat. And so their body, if they were to be walking around just trying to find food through the winter, it'd be really, really stressful on their body. Now, obviously, these more northern climates, most of Canada, but many parts of the United States, we do get a lot of snow, especially in the mountainous areas. But there's also a lot of places within the lower 48 and even Canada where you don't get a lot of snow. But here's the thing, even in the wintertime, there's not a lot of food available. The trees, everyone knows that deciduous trees drop their leaves, they go dormant. You don't have a lot of herbaceous food. You don't have a lot of grasses growing. You don't have a lot of forbs growing. And so it's more or less a dead time from anywhere from November all the way to March. There's just not a lot of food available. And so this is why hibernation is not dependent on snow and cold. Hibernation is driven because there's not a lot of good food growing out there for the bears to sustain themselves. So when does this happen? When do bears go to sleep or hibernate through the winter time? Well, that is variable from place to place, and it all depends on your geographic location. So obviously, the more northern latitudes, the longer that winter time period. The southern latitudes, you get down in the southern part of the US, it might only be a couple of months where things go dormant and they don't get a lot of snow. But again, even if it's just a couple of months, going a couple of months without food would be really, really difficult. Another thing does depend on the severity of winter. So if winter sets in early, bears will go into hibernation a little earlier. If winter kind of holds off and you have a pretty warm fall, they might be active a little bit longer trying to wait it out. But for the most part, usually the higher you go in latitude, the longer that hibernation is. Now, it could be as early as October in those more northern climates. It could be as late as December, sometimes even into January in some of those southern climates, especially in the United States. But they will have this period of dormancy where they're really not doing anything other than sleeping most of the time. So, okay, where do bears sleep? Because one of the things, again, this is a big source of confusion with a lot of people, because one of the first things they think about is, oh, it's a bear den. And this is what a lot of people think a bear den looks like. It's like, I don't know if you had Scooby-Doo up in Canada, but one of those giant caves where they walk in with a flashlight and it's 5 feet to the ceiling. That is not a typical bear cave in which a bear will hibernate in, because what they're looking for very specific, they have specific preferences for what kind of cave or what kind of place they use for their den site. And what they're looking for the most part, they want something that's really tight and cramped, and they also need it to be dry. Because if you have those two things, if you have a place where there's not a lot of air circulating around you and it's pretty dry, it is so much easier for your body to conserve heat. Now, if they went into a cave like you see on the screen and the airflow is flowing all around them, the cold air comes in and out, it would be very, very difficult for them to stay warm. But if they find a little shallow hole that they could barely get their body wedged into, it's going to do a much better. That you're not going to have a lot of airflow going around you in that midwinter time. And so the bear is able to stay warmer. Now, this is a typical bear den that you would find, some kind of opening or a rock outcropping that has a crevice here or there. very typical bear den for both black bears and grizzlies for the most part. Believe it or not, when it comes to black bears, they'll crawl into some of the most obscure places. And so you'll even find bear dens that are in a hollow tree. They'll find this little opening. A lot of those big trees are susceptible to like a heart fungus, where the inside of the tree will rot away, but y'all know that it's pretty much the outside of the tree, which is the live part of the tree. So the tree keeps growing, even though it has this hole or this cavity inside. And these black bears are fantastic climbers. They'll find that, they'll climb up, they'll crawl into that hole and spend the wintertime denning inside the base of a tree. I don't know if anyone saw it, but a couple of years ago, there was a den camera on a tree in Yosemite, and everyone was just watching. Every once in a while, you'd see the mother bear poke her nose out, and they were just watching to see when she would emerge from this tree. So kind of a neat thing. Not many people realize that bears oftentimes sleep in trees, but it's quite common, especially in the southern part of the United States, where you get those big deciduous trees. Grizzlies or brown bears typically use ground dens. They'll either find a hole like this, or they will even excavate it. A lot of times they'll go up high on a mountain. They have amazing claws. The grizzly claws or the brown bear claws are designed for digging, so they can find an area on the side of the mountain that's going to be fairly dry, and they can excavate these holes themselves where they will spend the wintertime. And so pretty interesting thing where you're going to find a bear sleeping for the winter. Okay, that's going to take us to the nerdy part, because right now I'm going to talk about how they sleep. And I just realized you can't even see me because I didn't turn my light on. But you don't need to see me, you need to watch my slides. So we're going to talk a little bit about how bears sleep. So here's the dilemma. The dilemma is a bear, this big bodied mammal that could weigh anywhere from 100 pounds to, you got the big brown bears that are over 1,000 pounds. And so the dilemma for this big mammal is, how do you stay alive without food and water for months on end? Now, sometimes it could be short, it could be a month or two. Sometimes it could be 5 months, maybe even 6 months in those really northern latitudes. How do you stay alive without eating or drinking? And so their body is just crazy designed to survive the winter hibernation. And so I'm going to use a real geeky analogy to explain it to you. And what we're going to talk about, we're going to take a car. And it's going to be a very basic analogy to help you understand. So you have this car, and the goal is to keep this car running. And so what you do, you go to the gas pumps and you fill it up. So you are full of gas. And the goal here is to keep this car running as long as you possibly can. And so it's really simple to understand. Which do you think would conserve the most gas and keep the car running the longest? If you were driving that car 150 kilometers per hour, 70 kilometers per hour, or if you just had the car idling. Obviously, everyone understands that if you're not doing a lot of things with that car and burning that gas, you're gonna keep that car running longer if you're only doing the basic to keep that car running, if you're just idling there. If you're running full out 150, 70 kilometers per hour, you're gonna burn through that gas and that car is gonna die on you before you know it. That is what I'm gonna be talking about when we're talking about a bear's metabolism. The metabolism is kind of that burning the gas that keeps that bear alive. And so different things, obviously if a bear is running full bore, he's going to be burning a lot of energy. If he's just walking about looking for food, he'll be burning less energy, but he's still going to be burning energy. If he goes through that wintertime pretty much sleeping, he's going to burn the least amount of energy. But this is the cool thing with hibernating animals. They have these adaptations to burn even less energy than if they were sleeping. And so let's talk first about animals that we call true hibernators. And this is, just so you know, this is where some of that confusion is about, oh, bears don't hibernate. Bears aren't considered true hibernators. Bears hibernate, but they're not considered a true hibernator like a groundhog, because they do things a little bit differently. And so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about a groundhog, which is the classic example of a true hibernating animal. And if you look during the wintertime, the groundhog, it's going to drop its heart rate to only literally a few beats per minute. You can barely detect it. It'll just be a beat every 15, 20, 30 seconds. It's also going to drop its heart rate, or I'm sorry, its respiration rate to where it's barely breathing. In fact, you oftentimes can't even tell it's breathing. And it might take a very shallow breath every once in a while. This is where it gets really cool. Their body temperature for this groundhog, this true hibernator, their body temperature is going to drop drastically. Now, typically, an awake, fully functioning groundhog, it's going to have a body temperature of about 35, 36 degrees Celsius. For those American folks out there, 98, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, very similar to humans. But what they do when they sleep in the wintertime, that body temperature drops to just above freezing. And so the body temperature for a groundhog will be about 2 degrees Celsius or 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it's literally, it's not frozen, it's above freezing, but it's really, really close. And the reason it does that is the metabolism, the amount of energy it takes to keep that animal alive drops about 50% every 10 to 12 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And so when they drop to that 2 degrees Celsius, when their body temperature drops to just above freezing, their metabolism, what it takes to stay alive, drops by 87%. And so they're burning barely any energy. And so whatever fat reserves they have is more than enough to keep them alive. The thing is with this groundhog or this true hibernator, they're almost in this like frozen coma-like state. It's going to take them a long time, like hours and hours, sometimes even a day, because they got to wake up, because they have to bring up their temperature. They'll bring up their respiration, their heart rate. It takes a long time to start generating the heat to bring them up to a functioning state. And so it takes them a long time to wake up. But this is where we get cool. We talk about bears being super hibernators or super sleepers, because what happens with a bear, doesn't matter if it's a brown bear or a black bear, their heart rate is going to drop tremendously. Again, a few beats per minute. They slow their heart rate down tremendously. Again, their respiration drops just like the woodchuck or the groundhog. We call them woodchucks in the States. I don't know if you ever heard that, but just like the true hibernator, their respiration drops tremendously. But this is where bears are different. Their body temperature does not drop much at all. It drops from about 35 or 36 degrees Celsius to about 33 degrees Celsius. Or if you're in the States, about 92 degrees Fahrenheit, 90, 92. So it only drops a little bit. So they're really, really warm. But here's where bears do amazing things. Their metabolism, even though they're still like, I don't want to say on fire because they're not running a fever, but they're still really warm. Their metabolism has dropped 75% by just dropping it a few degrees. And so they can sustain that body all throughout the winter hibernation by just going into this deep sleep that they go into. And so bears, instead of being in this frozen coma-like state, they're in this warm sleeping-like state. So they can wake up quickly. You enter a bear den where a bear is hibernating, they can wake up just in a matter of minutes as opposed to hours or even a day for other hibernating animals. And so it's really, really cool what they do with their bodies. But why is this so amazing? Here's the thing. I mentioned in the springtime, bears emerge from the den. When they emerge from that den in the springtime after spending months like without eating or drinking, sometimes the bears, they may have lost up to 30% of their body weight. Now I'm going to use pounds because I'm so used to pounds, but think of a 200-pound. How many kilograms is 200 pounds, Kim? About 400? No, it's the other way. It's about 100. I did the reverse. Anyway, think of of losing 30% of your body weight. If you go into, if a bear goes into the den weighing 200 pounds, it will come out having lost 60 pounds. And so it's amazing weight loss. The most amazing thing of all is when they lose all that weight, it's almost all fat and no muscle. And that's completely different than humans. If humans stay bedridden and don't move for weeks or months on end, they burn their muscle first. Bears are different. They burn their fat first. So just think about that. I know there's folks, I put it this way, I'm thinking about it. I got to lose some weight. Imagine being overweight and then you're like, you know what? I'm going to go to bed for a couple months, and you wake up and all the fat is gone and all you have is muscle. That would be one of the most amazing things. If we could crack that, someone's going to get rich selling that fat pill or sleeping pill, I should say. Here's the other thing. Bears, when they hibernate, they don't urinate or defecate for months on end. And so what happens is when they begin sleeping, they get very lethargic, and they start sleeping pretty much throughout the entire day. A lot of the lining of the small intestine and large intestine begins sloughing off. And so it sheds that outer layer. And what it does, it forms this fecal plug, this fecal plug. So I guess the best way of saying it, they become really constipated because they have this plug there, but that helps keep everything contained within their body. When you contain everything within your body, your kidneys begin to really get overworked. Now, in a human, if you're not urinating or defecating, you will die quickly because your body will poison itself. What a bear does is crazy because it takes that waste product and it recycles it. And so the fact that a bear does not die from poisoning its own body by not urinating or defecating for months on end is truly a miracle of science. Here's where it gets really cool. Remember, we talked a lot about a bear getting pregnant, or a female bear getting pregnant. It gets pregnant in the summertime, waits till the fall to see if there's enough fat on it to survive the pregnancy and the hibernation. Those eggs implant usually late fall, and they only have a couple months to grow within the mother's womb, and then she's going to give birth in the middle of her hibernation while she's sleeping. Yes, she will wake up, but for the most part, she wakes up. There's a couple of small cubs there. She goes back to bed. She tends to them. She sleeps. She is pretty much sleeping for a large part of the beginning part of that cub's life. They crawl up onto her teat where they will nurse off of her for a few months until they emerge from the den. But how cool would that be, especially for human females to go to sleep and then wake up? You go to sleep pregnant, you wake up and the baby's there. I bet you a ton of women would love that. So needless to say, bear hibernation remains a medical mystery. There are so many aspects of it that we cannot understand, and we have no idea how bears are able to do that. And so it is a truly, truly amazing feat how bears survive the winter hibernation. So let me talk just real quickly. I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to talk about, and then there were cubs, because she goes to sleep, a fat, healthy, happy, pregnant mom, and she wakes up and she's got cubs. And so what happens in the den? Well, she gives birth typically late January to early February. And those cubs, remember, those cubs were only in the womb maturing for about a month or two. So when they're born, they are tiny. Black bear cubs might only be a half a pound. And so they're extremely, extremely tiny. Like I say, they crawl up onto the mom and begin nursing. Just so you know, this photo here is a grizzly bear cub. But even the grizzlies will give birth to really tiny cubs. Anywhere from 1 to 3 cubs. Yes, you're going to have outliers where a bear gives birth to 4 cubs. A very famous brown bear gave birth to 4 cubs last year. Their eyes are closed. Mom wakes periodically to care for them. But by April, while she's sleeping for the most part, the cubs are going to be ready to greet the world. And so they're going to come out of that den, having nursed off mom for a number of months and growing off that highly nutritious bear milk. So how do we know all this? How do we know all this takes place in the den? This is one of my good friends, Carl Malcolm. He did his master's thesis researching bear hibernation. So yes, you get to crawl into bear dens. I've crawled into a couple of bear dens. It's pretty amazing, some of the stuff that the researchers do nowadays. But I hope you enjoyed that. To give you a quick summary, bears, they're unlike any other animals. They truly are nature's super sleepers, because the way they hibernate is very, very different than those quote unquote true hibernators. They still hibernate, they just do it a lot different. So with that, I'm going to ask if you have any questions. Before we go to the questions, Kim, I got to give photo credits, because there's my presentations are nothing without the cool pictures. So a lot of folks that gave me some photos for this presentation. For those that don't know me, I do have a wildlife education business. It's called Wildlife for You. You can look it up on the internet. One of the big things that we do, I've done a podcast with a co-host of mine. She's also a biologist. You can look that up. I think there's a link on our website, also on our Facebook page. The easiest way to follow us is follow us on Facebook. Just look up Wildlife for You if you enjoy this. So one of our catchphrases, these are all the talks we've given. One of our catchphrases is, when it comes to wildlife, your knowledge often means their existence. And that's why we give these classes. This is why Kim teaches what she teaches, because the more we can educate you on how to peacefully coexist with these critters, not only is it safer for humans, but it's safer for the animals we talk about. So with that, I am done, and I will be happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Woo! We can all clap, but you won't hear them. Thank you so much, Daryl. That was amazing.
Well, good. I'll answer whatever questions. I know I talk a mile a minute. I try to cram too much into the time I'm allotted, but hopefully I broke it down so you could have a better understanding of what's going on during that whole process of hibernation. So Kim, I can't see any chats, so if you want to lead the question period, you're more than welcome to.
Absolutely. Sarah's been keeping track of it, but I love hearing your presentations. You do an amazing job of taking science and making it really easy to understand with such incredible examples, and your visuals are always so fun. So thank you for that. But Sarah's been tracking this. Any questions that keep coming up there that you'd like for Daryl to answer, Sarah?
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's a lot. Okay. Well, someone asked, what is it like seeing a bear den in person?
I am so blessed, and I will tell you without a doubt, I don't know what I did to deserve the career that I've had, but the very first den I visited, I was actually fostering out some orphan cubs to black bears in the Smokies. And to be able to go in there, the cool, well, I shouldn't say the cool thing. Whenever you're visiting a bear den, usually you're going with a couple of people. You don't want to do this work by yourself. And so instead of drawing straws, who gets to go into the den first, it's usually the smallest person, which ruled me out for most of those. But they have to go in there. I mentioned that bears can wake up relatively quickly because they have this high body temperature. And so they'll be groggy, they'll be slow, but within a matter of minutes, they're back to being a bear. And so we do have to go in there and sedate an animal to make sure, just safety purposes, to make sure that the bear is not going to wake up and do damage to the humans or themselves. And so it was pretty awesome. I never got to go in first to sedate the bear, but as soon as the bear was sedated, I got to go in there and do den measurements and work up the cubs. I've even had the luxury of visiting a grizzly den in the Grand Tetons. People know that famous bear 399. One of her offspring had a den that was not too far from a road, and the grizzly bear biologist for the Tetons took myself and some of the students that I teach. We went to that den a few years ago, and it's awesome just to know that you're in a place where a bear spent the winter. Is just, not many people get to experience that, and I know how truly blessed I am.
That's amazing. Someone said, do bears come out of their dens periodically in the winter?
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that I don't want to say I argue, because people will say, well, I saw a bear in February one time, so they don't hibernate. Because they maintain that high body temperature. They understand they're sleeping most of the time. Sometimes they'll go in the den and they won't come out for a few months. Some bears, if it's a warm spell, if they don't have a lot of fat on them, they will wake up periodically and they will get out of the den. They'll try to look for some food. And so bears can be seen in midwinter, especially in the lower latitudes in the southern states. They will come out of their den. One of the things that we've been finding is, I mentioned how hibernation is an adaptation to survive periods without food. What they're seeing, there's been studies done around up in the state of Washington. It's even being seen in places like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where there's a lot of human foods available. The bears that have access to human foods are hibernating less. They still get very lethargic in the wintertime, but they're up and about, always looking for that extra morsel of food. Now, a completely wild bear where nature is just not providing anything with them, those bears tend to sleep more solidly. But yes, bears can wake up. They have a high body temperature. They can wake up, especially if they're disturbed. They can get up and get out of their den. So it's not uncommon for them to get out of the den, but for the most part, they stay sleeping as much as they can.
Okay, cool. And I guess that goes with our presentations, Kim, and why you should carry bear spray year round as well.
Absolutely. Although bear attacks are very rare in the winter, we definitely do see them once in a blue moon, and Alaska's had a few for sure in the last couple of years. Alberta, we've had a few that I'm aware of. Mainly people ice climbing and backcountry skiing, going into some of those higher altitudes where our grizzly bears are sleeping in mountainous environments. So
yeah, if you disturb their den site, like I said, because of that high temperature, they can wake up relatively quickly. So if there's activity on the outside of a bear den, whether or not it's skiers, hikers, backpackers, a bear can get up and be afraid and come out of the den or be defensive or whatnot. So yeah, the threat is not zero during the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. Daryl, do you know anything about osteoporosis in bears? Whether there was any studies on that?
Well, I don't know a lot of the hard medical stuff, other than bears don't exhibit osteoporosis. And that's one of the things with not being active, your bones, humans, lots of other mammals, their bones start to become brittle, but bears do not experience that. That's why they remain the medical mystery, is their body does things that are unlike what we know of as humans. And if we could crack that, there's bears being studied, hibernating bears being studied to learn how their bodies are doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked, is it true that certain mushrooms can plug bears up for the winter, like in the fecal plug that you mentioned?
I don't know that. I don't think they seek specific foods to help them form that fecal plug. That is just a process that their body undergoes. Like I said, they don't do it intentionally by eating specific foods, but when their body starts to shut down for that hibernation period, like I said, the inside lining of their intestines kind of sloughs off, and that's what that is what the fecal plug is mostly made up. It's that sloughed off intestinal lining that it forms.
Okay. Remember when you talked about when bears wake up, they lose their fat and not muscle? Somebody was asking how do researchers know that? Like, do they test their fecal matter?
Yeah, there's been lots of studies done where they'll test the bears before they go into the hibernation. And I imagine a lot of it was probably done like zoo bears. If you keep feeding a bear, it will stay awake. They'll definitely slow down more in the wintertime, but as long as you keep giving them food, they'll keep waking up and eating the food. And so oftentimes, if you're having captive bears, they will begin slowing down and shutting off the food source and kind of induce that bear's hibernation. So I imagine studies that have been done that measured whether or not it was muscle mass or fat that was lost was probably through captive studies. But yeah, that's the one thing that came out of those studies, and I can't cite exactly which studies they were, but I shouldn't say 100% of their weight was fat, but the majority of their weight loss is fat as opposed to muscle. When a human does not eat for a long time and stays bedridden, they begin to burn their muscle first.
Right. Okay. Wow, there's so many questions. We probably can't get to them all, guys. Sorry. In the den, is the mama bear awake enough to move her cubs around and make sure they can reach her for feeding? And also, can you speak on the milk quality? Is it nutritious enough?
Yes. Yes, mom wakes up periodically and tends to her cubs. She'll lick them clean. I don't know if it's a daily thing. There have been some den cameras that have been put in place, and oftentimes throughout the hibernation, you'll see mom kind of moving around. She sleeps a lot, but she will tend to the cub. If a cub falls off her nipple and can't find it, and the cub starts crying, that will wake mom up. She'll reposition herself. But for the most time, she's sleeping a lot. The cool thing is those cubs crawl up onto the mom and nurse off her for literally months on end. When it comes to bear milk, and if you go to the store and buy cow's milk, you're looking at that cow's milk that has about 8% fat in it. Or I think it's like 5 to 8% fat in it. Bear's milk is up to 25% fat. So it's 3 to 4 times more, I'll say, nutritious. It has a higher fat content than cow's milk. And so that photo I showed at the end of my friend Carl Malcolm doing one of his studies, he said he was working in a den and he was turning the mother over, and her nipple exuded some of the bear's milk onto his wrist. And he looked at it and it kind of flowed down his wrist. He said, Daryl, as soon as the air hit it, the cold air hit it, he goes, it turned into butter. That's how crazy it is. And so, yes, bear's milk is 3 to 4 times more nutritious or higher fat content than cow's milk. That's why those cubs will grow so quickly, from being born a couple of pounds to emerging from the den weighing 10 to 15 pounds or whatever kilogram conversion that is. They grow extremely quickly in the den.
Amazing. Okay, that's probably all the questions we can take for today. We do have to give away some prizes as well, but someone was curious if they have further questions, could they email you or?
Yeah. Kim, do you want me to give my email, or should they?
Sure.
Send
Yeah, go ahead. And I've also shared your website with people so they can follow you, and you're also on Facebook as well. It's wildlifeforyou.com, right?
Yeah, that's the website. The Facebook is Wildlife for You. If you want to email me questions, I'm happy to answer anyone that reaches out to me. I throw my phone number out here, but I'll think I'll stop there. My email address, in fact, Kim, if you want to type it, it's that wildlife for you training at gmail.com.
Training. Did you say at gmail.com?
Yeah, it's a long one, I know, but I just wanted wildlife for you at gmail.com, but it was taken.
Perfect.
That's great. Thank you, Daryl. This has been awesome. And yeah, please do check out Daryl's podcast. And he's been doing some amazing talks over the last few years. So we're just so fortunate to have him come and do this here in late September and get all of us thinking about bears and what they're doing as they head into the winter. And I would encourage you all that to remember that in the fall to give bears space, especially mamas. You know, you don't know if they're pregnant or if they have cubs, and always keep your dogs on leash. Dogs can harass bears, and again, they're expending more calories and stressing themselves out and not getting access to food sources. So if you see a bear on the trail, give them space, back away, leave the area. If you have a dog, leash them up. Don't harass wildlife, because it's going to be a tough winter ahead for them as it is. So it's good to give them that opportunity to feed and not have to lose a food source because of us. So just a quick safety reminder as always. And then last couple of things before we give away a couple prizes is thank you all again for signing up through recsafewithwildlife.com. If you're interested in our courses or coming to more of our free classes, we have a Facebook page, we have Instagram. And for those of you that you've all registered, so Sarah will send you an email tomorrow. If you want to take some of our classes online, you're welcome to. We've got tons of free resources on the membership. And for everyone that came to tonight's class, if you want to take our 2-hour bear safety class, you'll all get 20% off. And the coupon code is BEARDEN, to keep it simple. And a massive thanks to our sponsor, Scat Belt. Mark is here on the call. And scatbelt.com, you can check out their website. They have, of course, bear spray holsters, and they're easy to carry. And I love them because you can wear them over top of your jacket. And I wear mine year round, which is great in the wintertime. And Sarah's going to give away a Scat Belt, and then she's going to give away one of our bear safety classes as well.
Yes, so the winner of the Scat Belt tonight is Catherine Clayle. Catherine, if you're on the call, I will email you the information for the Scat Belt prize. And as for the bear safety course, the winner of that is Dora Masters.
Congratulations, both of you. That's great.
So I will email Dora and Catherine, and I'll also email everybody the 20% off code if you don't get it fast enough in the chat there.
Yeah. We hope to have some more talks into the fall. I think next month we're talking about doing another cougar talk, and potentially some more speakers that can come in and chat about some more of the specifics on the science of some of these animals, which would be pretty fun over the winter time. All right, everyone, thank you all so much again for being here. We so appreciate your time. Please share this knowledge with your friends and family and help everyone out there be safe in the outdoors and help conserve these amazing animals that we share the landscape with. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Sarah. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.